Growth rarely looks like growth at first. In fact, it can feel like the farthest thing from progress. Isn't that true? You set a new goal, you get excited, you decide. It's time for change. The first few days, maybe even the first few weeks, you're putting in more effort than ever, but what's happening? Not much, at least not on the surface. I remember the first time I tried to get in shape, walked out to the track, started jogging, huffing and puffing, muscles aching, feeling every bit of that old routine. Holding me back, came back home, looked in the mirror. No difference. Next day out. Again, same effort, same story. By the end of the week, I'm working harder than ever and the scale hasn't budged. The mirror doesn't care. Friends can't tell. Now, why is that? Because in the early stage, sport always exceeds visible reward. It's the illusion of slow progress, and it's a powerful illusion too. This is where most people quit. They mistake foundation building for failure. You ever seen that happen? Maybe you've done it yourself, started something new, worked hard for a week or two, but because you couldn't see the results, you started to wonder if it was even worth it. That's the trick the early stage plays on us. You're laying bricks, but you can't see the building yet. You're watering seeds, but the ground looks just the same as it did yesterday. You tell yourself, I should be further along by now. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe this plan just doesn't work. But if you stick around long enough, you realize something. All the work you do in the beginning, all that sweat and repetition is never wasted. It's the foundation. If the foundation is weak, everything else falls. If the foundation is strong, the rest can rise. But here's the thing. The foundation is invisible. It's just like learning a new language. The first few months you fumble through words, you struggle with grammar, you feel foolish every time you open your mouth, progress hardly visible. But underneath, something is happening. Connections are being made. Muscle memory is forming. Confidence is being built, brick by invisible brick. You know, I've seen it in business too. You open the doors, you're ready for the crowds, and what happens? Not much. A trickle of customers, maybe some days. None. You go home at night and you start to doubt. Did I make a mistake? But while you're busy worrying, you're learning, you're figuring out the systems, you're refining your approach. Each day is a lesson, each problem a teacher. It's easy to look at the great success, the flourishing businesses, the talented musicians, the fit and healthy, and think it was always that way. But what you don't see is the months, even years of slow, invisible progress, the effort that exceeded the reward day after day. The real challenge is to trust the process when you can't see the results. That's the illusion of slow progress. It's not slow, it's just hidden, like the roots of a tree growing strong and deep before you ever see the branches reach for the sky. And the real tragedy, most people quit right here.
They walk away during the invisible phase, never knowing how close they were to a breakthrough. They abandon the garden before the first sprout. So here's the question: when you find yourself in that early stage when growth feels slow or even absent, can you remind yourself that what's invisible is just as important as what's visible? Can you keep laying bricks, keep watering seeds, keep building a foundation that nobody else can see? That's the first test of any worthwhile pursuit. Growth rarely looks like growth at first. But that's exactly why it's so powerful when IT finally appears. Now let's talk about the law of the curve. You see, every bit of progress in life, real progress, follows a certain pattern. IT isn't a straight line, not in business, not in relationships, not in personal development. It's a curve. Sometimes that curve feels more like a flat line, doesn't it? But if you look closely, you'll notice something fascinating. The curve has a life of its own. Think back to learning any valuable skill. At the start, the learning curve is gentle, almost horizontal. You're investing effort, but the gains are tiny. You try, you practice, you stumble. Results are slow to show, but keep at it. Eventually, there's a bend in the road, a turning point, where effort starts to compound quietly and almost magically. I remember the first time I started reading books seriously, picked up one then another. At first it felt like I wasn't any wiser after 2 or 3. But then one day I caught myself quoting an idea in conversation. Not because I'd rehearsed it, but because it had settled somewhere deep. The information was compounding just below the surface. That's how the law of the curve works. At first, results are invisible, almost silent. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and the line barely moves. Most people get frustrated during this stretch. They want instant returns, they want fireworks, but fireworks are what you get at the top of the curve, not the bottom. If you could plot your progress on a graph, you'd see it slow steady. Then suddenly a sharp rise. That's the power of compounded effort, skills, habits, and results compound quietly. Each repetition, each page read, every call made, every hour invested in your craft, they all stack up. Even when you can't see them. Take saving money, for example. You start putting away a little each month. At first, the balance grows slowly. But then comes interest, the eighth wonder of the world. Someone once called it compounding is quiet. At first, almost boring. But over time, it transforms nickels and dimes into fortunes. The curve begins to rise, and it doesn't rise gradually. It rises sharply, almost catching you by surprise. Why is that? Because the breakthrough always comes after long stretches of steady discipline. That's the secret. The curve is only invisible to those who quit too soon. The rest discover that patience,
combined with consistent action, always pays dividends. And here's something I want you to remember. All progress follows this curve. Relationships do too. The first conversations, the awkwardness, the uncertainty. Then if you stick with it, trust grows and suddenly the relationship accelerates. The same goes for leadership, for building a business, for learning an instrument. Invisible, gradual, then exponential. So, the next time you catch yourself thinking this is taking too long, remind yourself that every worthwhile endeavor climbs a curve. The key is to stay with it long enough to see the bend, to reach that point where things begin to compound. I love how nature reminds us of this law. The bamboo tree is one of my favorite examples. For years, you water and nurture the seed. Nothing happens. No sign of growth. 5 years, just watering dirt. Then suddenly, in a matter of weeks, the bamboo shoots up to the sky. Was it growing only during those weeks? No, it was growing the entire time, underground, building roots, preparing for a breakthrough. So ask yourself, what curve are you climbing, right? Now, are you patient enough to stay the course even when progress is silent? Because the day will come, if you stay steady, when that curve will turn and everything you've built will show up in a rush. That's the law of the curve, invisible, gradual, then exponential. Now, before anyone ever sees the results, before the applause, the recognition, the visible success, there's always the hidden work phase. It's the quiet part of the journey where you show up when no one is watching. This is where the seeds of greatness are sound watered and given time to grow. Think about the athlete out on the track before sunrise. No cameras, no cheering crowds, just the sound of footsteps, breath in the air, the repetition of drills that look almost boring to the untrained eye, or the entrepreneur burning the midnight oil, working out systems, poring over numbers, trying to solve one more problem before calling it a night. That's the hidden work phase. Reading, studying, practicing, saving. Each small action adds invisible layers of potential waiting to surface. You pick up a book and it doesn't feel like much. You finish a chapter, maybe take a note or two, but finish another and another, and soon enough you're thinking new thoughts, you're using new language. The compound effect is working for you, even if you can't see it yet. I've had young people come up to me frustrated. They tell me I'm putting in the hours, I'm doing the work, but nothing's happening. I say trust the process. It's in those unseen hours, the early mornings and late nights, that the foundation is built. Every page read, every conversation with a mentor, every hour spent refining your skills, these are deposits in an account that will one day pay out in ways you can't even imagine. Nobody applauds you for going to the library. Nobody gives a standing ovation when you wake up early to review your notes.